The morning Lena Chase's son said his first word, she was not there to hear it. She was on the 31st floor of the Meridian Tower, standing at the head of a glass conference table with 8 men who collectively managed a portfolio worth $2 billion, explaining why the Hartwell mixed-use acquisition was the most strategically sound move her company had made in 7 years. She was right, and she knew it, and the men around the table knew it too, even the ones who were still deciding whether to be impressed by a 34-year-old woman who had taken her late father's mid-sized development company and built it into something that made institutional investors nervous in the good way. Her phone was face down on the table beside her water glass. She did not check it. Lena Chase did not check her phone during presentations. It was a rule she had made for herself at 26 and kept at 34 and intended to keep at 60, on the theory that the moment you glanced at a screen in a room full of people, you told them something about where your attention actually lived. The Hartwell acquisition closed in principle at 11:47 in the morning. She shook hands. She thanked the men by name in the order they had spoken. She waited until she was alone in the elevator before she picked up her phone and read the message from Marcus, her son's behavioral specialist, sent at 11:22. She read it 3 times standing in the descending elevator with the city dropping away outside the glass wall. Eli said a word today. One clear word. You'll want to hear the recording. She stood very still. The elevator reached the lobby. She did not move until the doors began to close again, and then she put her hand out to stop them. Eli was 4 years old and profoundly deaf in his right ear and severely hearing impaired in his left. The cochlear implant had been placed 8 months ago. The speech therapy had been weekly since before that. Marcus had been working with Eli for 11 months. The specialist had told Lena that with early intervention and consistent support, meaningful speech was possible, likely even. They had also told her that the first word, when it came, would probably emerge during a low-stakes, unguarded moment. Not during a session, not during a drill, during something ordinary. She had missed the ordinary moment. She was on the highway before she let herself think about that clearly. Marcus had sent a voice memo. She did not play in the car because she did not want to be driving when she heard it for the first time. She wanted to be still. She had learned this about herself in the past 4 years. There were certain things she could only receive properly if she was not moving. The session notes came through while she was stopped at a red light. She read the first line. He said it to another child's father in the waiting room. Not to me. Not during session. To a stranger. She put the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove the rest of the way with both hands on the wheel and something she would not yet name sitting in her chest. The Bright Path Early Intervention Center sat on a side street off the main avenue in a neighborhood that had been quietly improving for the past decade. It occupied the ground floor of a converted brownstone and had a small waiting room with upholstered chairs in primary colors and a reception window with a sliding glass panel and a low wooden table in the corner stocked with picture books and a basket of quiet toys. Lena had sat in this room every Tuesday and Thursday for 11 months. She knew which chair had a loose leg. She knew that the receptionist kept peppermints in a ceramic dish and that the dish was always positioned exactly 2 inches from the right edge of the counter. She knew that the waiting room smelled like warm wood and something faintly citrus. She did not know the names of the other parents who cycled through on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She was almost always on her phone when they arrived and almost always gone by the time her sessions ended. She was aware that this was not ideal. She was also aware that 37 employees depended on decisions she made in those 45 minutes of waiting, and that awareness tended to win. Marcus met her in the doorway of the therapy room. He was a soft-spoken man in his mid-40s with the patient, unhurried quality of someone who had spent 2 decades learning to communicate through means other than words. He handed her a tablet. The recording was 31 seconds long. She pressed play. The audio was slightly uneven, caught on Marcus's phone from across the room. She could hear the ambient sounds of the waiting room, the soft murmur of a television on low, a chair shifting, the distant sound of a door. Then she heard a voice she did not recognize. Low, unhurried, with the specific gentleness of someone who has learned to speak to a child the way you'd lower yourself to sit on the floor with them, without condescension, without performance. "Hey, buddy, you dropped this." And then, after a pause that felt in the recording like the held breath before something breaks the surface, she heard Eli's voice. Small and effortful and clear as anything she had ever heard in her life. "Truck." She pressed stop. She pressed play again. "Truck." She handed the tablet back to Marcus because her hands were not entirely steady and she did not want to drop it. Who was he? The man in the recording. Marcus checked his notes. Father of another patient. His daughter has been coming here about 3 months. His name is Daniel Reyes. He brings her every Thursday. Lena nodded. She filed the name away the way she filed everything, quickly, efficiently, in the correct category. The category here was person to whom she owed a word of thanks. She collected Eli from the therapy room. He came to her in the reliable way he always did, with his whole body, arms up, face forward, no hesitation. He smelled like the mild soap they used here and something underneath it that was simply him, the smell she had memorized before anything else, before she memorized his features or his voice or the particular angle of his sleeping face. She held him for a moment longer than usual. "Truck," she said quietly against the top of his head. Using the sign, simultaneously the way Marcus had taught her, the right hand moving from open to closed, a gesture like catching something. Eli pulled back and looked at her with the evaluating expression that 4-year-olds deploy when they suspect an adult of being overly emotional. Then he pointed at the basket in the corner, toward the collection of small toys, toward a red toy truck sitting at the edge. "Truck," he said again. She laughed. It came out wrong. Too compressed, too close to something else. But Eli laughed back anyway, because her laugh, whatever shape it took, had always made him laugh. She carried him to the car. She buckled him in. She sat in the driver's seat and looked at the steering wheel for a moment. Then she pulled out of the parking space. She did not see the man on the sidewalk who turned to watch the silver car go. She did not see the way he looked at the building after she was gone, the way his daughter tugged his hand, and he looked down at her and said something that made her lean against his arm. She was already a block away, replaying a 31-second audio file in her mind, hearing one word over and over. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Daniel Reyes had not planned to be in this neighborhood at all. The Bright Path Center had come up in a search he ran on a Thursday night after Rosa's audiologist mentioned it as a supplement to her ongoing sound therapy, something with a stronger play-based component, something that might help her connect the clinical work to something that felt more like just being a kid. Rosa was 6. She had mild to moderate hearing loss in both ears, managed with bilateral hearing aids, small devices the color of her favorite nail polish. A pale lilac, she had chosen herself with the seriousness of someone selecting a permanent architectural feature. She wore them without complaint. She had never, as far as Daniel knew, felt diminished by them. He suspected this was partly her temperament, which was constitutionally optimistic in the way of certain people who seemed to arrive that way, and partly because he had made a deliberate decision in the weeks after the diagnosis to never let her see him treat them as a tragedy. He had learned the basics of sign language in 6 weeks. He was still learning. He practiced with Rosa in the evenings, naming things around the apartment, working through the alphabet, running the signs for colors and animals and foods while she corrected his hand shape with the supervisory authority of someone who had been attending sessions longer. She was always right. His hand shapes were often slightly off. He took the correction without ego because there was no ego available for that particular use. Not anymore. Not since the version of his life that might have accommodated ego had been replaced by this one, which was smaller in some ways and more precisely organized around the things that actually mattered. He was 38 years old. He had been raising Rosa alone since she was 2, since her mother, Carla, had left for a teaching position abroad and gradually, without a defined single moment, stopped coming back. He did not speak badly of Carla to Rosa. He did not speak of her much at all. Rosa asked sometimes. He answered honestly, in the limited way that honesty could be offered to a 6-year-old about a complicated adult situation, with the assurance that she was loved by both her parents and the acknowledgement that sometimes adults made choices that were hard to explain and hard for everyone involved. He worked as a groundskeeper and maintenance lead for the Hillcrest residential complex, a mid-range apartment property 20 minutes from where they lived. The work was physical and consistent and paid enough, supplemented by occasional weekend landscaping contracts he picked up through a small network of referrals. He drove a truck that was 12 years old and had recently begun expressing opinions about hills. He had bought it with the last of a different life savings. He kept it maintained himself, which was one of the things he was good at, the quiet, practical management of things that needed attention before they became crises. The waiting room at Bright Path was the same each Thursday. He arrived at 10 minutes before the hour, signed Rosa in at the window, and sat in one of the chairs near the window with his phone and a thermos of coffee he brought from home because the center's coffee was made with the specific hopelessness of institutional brewing. Rosa went in without ceremony. She had decided on her second visit that Marcus was acceptable, and on her third visit that he was genuinely excellent, and since then she had walked into the therapy room with the authority of someone keeping an appointment she had personally scheduled. He was reading something on his phone, a maintenance product review, when he heard the sound. He looked up, because the sound was the kind that locates itself in a specific place in your attention without demanding it. In a corner, near the toy basket, a small boy was crouched on the floor, examining the bottom of a red toy truck with the focused interest of a child investigating a mechanism. He had knocked it over the edge of the basket, reaching for it. He was reaching now, at the edge of the low table, for a second piece that had rolled. It had rolled toward Daniel's chair. Daniel picked it up before it went under. He lowered himself off the chair into a crouch, bringing himself to the boy's level. "Hey, buddy, you dropped this." He held out the small red car. The boy looked at him. He had very dark eyes and the evaluating, unbothered openness of a child who has not yet been taught to be suspicious of strangers who offer things. Then the boy looked at the truck in his own hand and the car in Daniel's hand, and back up at Daniel. And he said, with the particular effortfulness of a word that has been forming for a long time before it arrives, "Truck." Daniel smiled. "Truck," he confirmed. He did it with his hands too, almost without thinking, the sign he had learned in week 3 of the self-directed course he'd been working through. Rosa had taught him the correct hand shape. The boy's eyes went to his hands. Something shifted in the boy's expression, some specific, calibrated attention that Daniel recognized as the quality of someone for whom hands carry more information than they do for most people. The boy made the sign back, imperfectly but recognizably. Then he made it again, more cleanly. Then he pointed at the truck in his own hand. "Truck," he said again. "Truck," Daniel said again. They stayed there for a moment on the floor of the waiting room in a conversation that had reached the natural boundary of its vocabulary and was content to remain there. Rosa appeared in the hallway doorway, released 10 minutes early because she had worked through the session material ahead of schedule, which Marcus had begun to expect. She surveyed the waiting room with the efficient attention of a child assessing a new context. She walked to the corner table, sat down on the floor next to the small boy, and picked up a picture book from the stack with the comfort of someone settling into a space they've decided is acceptable. The two children sat together without introduction. The boy looked at Rosa's hearing aids with curiosity, not alarm. Rosa looked at his cochlear implant with the same quality of noticing. She reached over and tapped the truck in his hand once, a gentle requesting gesture. He handed it to her. She handed him the picture book. They examined their respective objects in silence. Daniel sat back in his chair and watched them and thought about the ordinary grace of children who have not yet learned that differences require commentary. He did not see the recording. He did not know anyone had captured the moment. He gathered Rosa's things when it was time. He signed her out at the window. He walked her out to the parking lot, her hand in his, her backpack shaped like an owl because she had selected it on the basis that owls were sensible animals with good judgment. He was halfway to the truck when Rosa said, without particular emphasis, the way she reported most things as observed fact rather than event, "That boy couldn't hear very well." "No," Daniel said. "Not very well. Like me?" "Different from you," he said, "but a little bit like you." She absorbed this. She climbed up into the truck and buckled herself in with the concentration of someone who has decided to manage this independently. He started the engine. "Does he have a dad?" she asked. "I think so," Daniel said. "He must be nice," Rosa said, looking out the window. Daniel looked at her. "Why do you say that?" "Because the boy wasn't scared," she said, with the simple logic of someone explaining an obvious chain of reasoning. "He was just doing something." Daniel drove. The morning was cool, and the streets were beginning to fill, and the truck made its way through the neighborhood with the patient, slightly effortful progress of something that intended to arrive. He was not thinking about the silver car that had pulled out of the lot as he reached the sidewalk. He was thinking about Rose's hearing aid appointment the following week, and whether he had remembered to request the Thursday morning shift coverage, and whether the supply order for the mulch delivery had gone through. He was thinking about the ordinary forward-moving work of a day that had no reason to be anything other than ordinary. He did not think it had been anything else. He was wrong about that, though he would not know it yet for 11 days. Lena did not go back to the office that afternoon. This was unusual enough that her assistant sent a careful inquiry at 2:15, which Lena answered with a brevity that communicated clearly that no further inquiry was warranted. She took Eli to the park near their building. She sat on a bench while he moved through the small climbing structure with the methodical determination he brought to physical challenges, testing each handhold before committing his weight, assessing angles with the patience of someone who has decided that the view from the top is worth whatever sequence of decisions gets him there. She watched him and thought about the word. Not the word itself, which was ordinary. Any child's first clear word could have been anything. Truck was as good as any other window into language. She thought about where it had happened. Not in session. Not in the careful constructed environment of Marcus's room with its tools and mirrors and the picture cards arranged on the low shelf. In the waiting room. On the floor. In a conversation with a stranger's hands. She had watched enough sessions through the one-way window to understand what Marcus was doing and why he was doing it. The specific scaffolding of play-based language acquisition. The way comprehension and production were built not through repetition of isolated sounds, but through meaningful exchange. She understood the theory. She had done what she always did with things she didn't understand. She had read the research, retained the relevant frameworks, and then handed the actual execution to the most qualified person available and cleared obstacles from his path. This was how she managed everything. It worked. She was good at clearing obstacles. She had removed every financial obstacle she could identify from Eli's care since the diagnosis. The implant, the best audiologist in the city. Marcus, who had a 6-month wait list and whose rate she had paid without negotiation. She had made herself an expert in the logistics of his condition. What she had apparently not managed was being there when the thing she'd built the infrastructure for actually happened. The climbing structure gave Eli a moment of difficulty on the third handhold. He stopped. He looked at the problem. He adjusted his grip. He proceeded. She thought. He learned that from somewhere. She thought, probably from me. She thought, and also probably in spite of me, which is a more complicated thing to think. She pulled out her phone. She found the session notes Marcus had forwarded. She reread the line. He said it to another child's father in the waiting room. Not to me. Not during session. To a stranger. She put the phone away. She watched Eli reach the platform at the top of the climbing structure. He stood up there and looked around at the park from his new elevation, and his face arranged itself into the expression that she privately and somewhat desperately loved most, the one that meant, "I see more from here." She waved. He waved back. She thought. His first word was truck. She thought. I wonder if there was a truck in a stranger's hands. She thought. I'm going to find out who this man is. The thought arrived with the quiet inevitability of a decision already made before it surfaces to consciousness. She was not certain why it felt important. She told herself it was simply that she owed him a thank you. She was honest enough with herself, usually, to recognize when she was telling herself something that was only partly true. She was not quite ready to look at the part that was left. She found his name in the center's sign-in log on the following Thursday. She had arrived 20 minutes early, which she told herself was about Eli's schedule and not about anything else. She stood at the reception window and asked Patricia, the receptionist, a question she framed as administrative. "The man who was here last week," she said, "his daughter has hearing aids, lilac-colored. I think our children interacted. I wanted to thank him." Patricia checked the log without suspicion because Lena had been coming here for 11 months and had the established credibility of a regular. Daniel Reyes, Patricia said. He usually arrives around 10 to the hour. Lena thanked her. She sat down in the chair near the window, the one with the good leg, and waited. He arrived at 9:52. She recognized him before she had a reason to, which was the kind of thing she noted and set aside. He was tall, with the particular build of someone whose physicality was functional rather than cultivated, broad through the shoulders in a way of sustained work rather than deliberate effort. He wore a jacket that had been well kept past the point where keeping it was easy. His daughter came in beside him with an owl backpack and hearing aids the color of pale lilac and the expression of someone arriving at a place they've decided is theirs. He signed her in at the window. He said something to Patricia that made Patricia smile without effort, the kind of smile that doesn't require preparation. He turned toward the seating area and saw Lena and registered her with a neutral, unassuming attention of someone who notices things without announcing that he's noticed them. She stood. She had not planned to stand. It simply happened, the way things happen when a prepared person encounters a moment that is slightly different from the version they prepared for. Mr. Reyes, she said, my name is Lena Chase. My son Eli was here last Thursday. He looked at her without any particular shift in his expression, waiting with the ease of someone untroubled by not yet knowing where a thing is going. I heard the recording, she said. What he said to you? She stopped. She had given more than 400 professional presentations and had never once lost the thread mid-sentence. This was a different kind of sentence. He waited. It was his first word, she said. Truck. He looked at her for a moment. Then something moved across his face, not surprise exactly, more like the quiet recognition of something that had been sitting at the periphery and had just moved into full view. He sat down in the chair across from hers without making a production of it, and she sat back down, and they were level with each other in the primary colored chairs of a waiting room that smelled like warm wood and something faintly citrus. I didn't know that, he said. His voice was the same one from the recording. Low, unhurried. I thought he was just a kid who dropped something. He was, she said. He also hadn't spoken a word before that moment. Daniel was quiet for a beat. Not the quiet of someone searching for the correct response, but the quiet of someone receiving information and letting it settle before they do anything with it. You picked up the sign for truck, she said. The one you used. You made it back at you. Marcus said that's what unlocked it. The natural exchange. The hands. He looked at his own hands briefly, the way a person looks at something they've been carrying without thinking about it. Rosa taught me, he said. My daughter. She's been correcting my hand shapes for months. She's good at it. She is, Lena said, and then stopped because she had not intended to say that, and it revealed that she had been watching. He didn't seem bothered by it. He seemed, if anything, slightly amused in the contained way of someone who keeps most of what they find amusing to themselves. She said, I came to thank you. He said, you don't need to. She said, I know I don't need to. He accepted this without deflection and without false modesty, and she found that she respected it, the clean receiving of a thing offered plainly. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Rosa emerged from the therapy hallway 12 minutes before the session should have ended. Marcus appeared behind her with the expression of a man who has learned not to be surprised by this. She finished, Marcus said simply. He looked at Lena with the brief, professional warmth he always carried. Then he looked at Daniel. She asked if she could practice with Eli next time. If that's all right with both of you. Lena looked at Eli, who was sitting on the floor near the toy basket with the red truck in both hands, watching Rosa with the calm, assessing interest he brought to new people he had not yet decided about. Rosa sat down next to him without asking. She picked up the picture book from the stack. She handed it to Eli. Eli looked at the book. He looked at Rosa. He handed her the truck. She examined it with the gravity of someone accepting a formal exchange. Then she opened the book and pointed at the first page and looked at Eli. Eli looked at the page. He looked at Rosa. He looked across the room at his mother. Lena gave him the smallest nod. He looked back at Rosa. He pointed at the page. Dog, he said. Rosa signed it back. Eli watched her hands. He tried the sign himself, imprecise but directed. Rosa adjusted his fingers with the supervisory patience of someone who has been doing this for other people her whole short life. Lena did not look away from her son. Beside her, Daniel did not look away from his daughter. The room was quiet in the specific way of a room where something is happening that does not require commentary. After a moment, without planning it, Lena said, "She's remarkable." Daniel said, "Yeah." He said it the way people say things they have thought 10,000 times and have never stopped meaning. She looked at him then. Not quickly, not sideways. She looked at him directly, the way she looked at things she was trying to understand. He was looking at Rosa. His face was open in the specific way that faces open when they're not performing anything for anyone. She thought, "I don't know anything about this man." She thought, "That is not the same as knowing nothing." She thought, Eli said truck. She thought, he used his hands without thinking. She thought, he came to a place like this every Thursday and brought coffee from home and sat in a chair and waited and did not look like a man who found any of that to be a burden. The session ended. The children were gathered. The goodbyes were said simply, without ceremony. At the door, Rosa turned and waved at Eli with her whole hand. Eli raised the red truck toward her. Then he lowered it. He looked at Daniel. He held the truck out. Daniel crouched and accepted it with both hands, the way you accept something offered by a child, with your full attention. "Thank you," Daniel said. "Truck," Eli said. Daniel smiled. "Truck," he confirmed. He handed it gently back and stood. Lena watched this. She had the sudden, specific feeling of a person who has just seen something they're going to remember for a long time and already knows it. She did not look him up that night. This was a choice she made consciously, the way she made most choices, by identifying the impulse and then deciding whether to act on it. The impulse was there. She had a name and a face, and the particular curiosity of a person who suspects that a thing is more layered than its surface and wants to know how many layers. She did not act on it. She put Eli to bed and sat in the kitchen with a glass of water and thought about Rosa adjusting Eli's hand shape with two small, careful fingers, and decided that some things were allowed to simply be what they appear to be, at least for one more day. The following Thursday, she arrived again at 9:50. He was already there. He had the thermos. He had the chair near the window. He moved one seat over without being asked, which gave her the chair with a good leg, which meant he had noticed the week before that she always sat in it. She did not comment on this. She sat down. He offered the thermos. She accepted, which surprised them both slightly. They did not talk very much. Rosa and Eli were in the same session for the first time, a trial arrangement Marcus had suggested with the careful optimism of someone who had watched something work in a waiting room and wanted to see whether it translated. Through the one-way glass, Eli and Rosa sat across a low table from each other with picture cards arranged between them. Rosa would sign. Eli would attempt. Rosa would adjust. Marcus stayed at the edge of the room and did very little, which was Lena had learned how Marcus looked when a session was going exceptionally well. She and Daniel watched through the glass in a silence that was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people watching something that belongs to both of them without belonging to either of them entirely. At some point she said, quietly, "He's been working toward this for 11 months. Daniel said, equally quietly, "Rosa has been waiting for someone to practice with." She didn't realize that was what she was waiting for until just now. Lena looked at him. He was watching Rosa through the glass with the expression she was beginning to understand was simply his face when he was not guarding it, open and attentive and without any performance of ease, just the actual thing. She said, "How long have you been learning to sign?" "Since her diagnosis," he said. "About 2 years. I'm still not good at it. She corrects me constantly. She's 6. He smiled. "She's very thorough," he said. They watched the session. At one point, Eli produced a sign Lena did not recognize and looked to Rosa for confirmation, and Rosa shook her head and demonstrated the correct form twice with patient repetition, and Eli tried again, and Rosa nodded once with the finality of someone issuing a ruling. Daniel made a quiet sound beside her that was almost a laugh. "That's the nod," he said. "When she gives you the nod, you know you've actually got it." Lena filed this away. The session ended. The children came out. Eli went directly to his mother and then immediately turned and looked at Rosa and signed something Lena did not fully catch. Rosa signed back. Eli looked at his mother. Lena looked at Marcus. He was smiling with the specific quality of a man watching something exceed his own projections. He said, he just asked her if she would come back next week. She said yes. Lena looked at her son. Eli was watching Rosa with the calm, settled expression of someone who has located a thing they did not know they were looking for and is simply glad it has been found. She thought, 11 months. She thought, 45 minutes in a waiting room on my phone. She thought, I've been so careful about everything except the thing that was actually happening. Outside on the sidewalk, the four of them stood for a moment in the particular way of people who have shared a space and are now navigating the return to separate ones. Rosa was telling Eli something in a combination of sign and speech with the fluency of someone for whom the two channels are simply one language. Eli was watching her hands with the focused attention he gave to things he intended to understand completely. Daniel said to Lena, without preamble, there's a park 2 blocks east. Rosa and I go on Thursdays after session. If Eli wanted to come. He said it simply, the way he said most things, as an offer rather than a proposition, with no freight attached to it beyond what it plainly was. Lena looked at her son. She looked at Rosa. She looked at Daniel. She said yes. The park had a climbing structure and a wide flat area of pavement, where Rosa immediately produced a piece of chalk from her jacket pocket with the preparedness of someone who brings her own materials to every location. She began drawing on the pavement with the focused intention of someone executing a design she has been planning. Eli watched for a moment, then crouched beside her, and she handed him a second piece of chalk without looking up from her work. They drew. Lena and Daniel sat on a bench at the edge of the pavement and watched them. The afternoon light was the low gold of late autumn, the kind that makes ordinary things look considered. She said, "Can I ask you something?" He said yes. She said, "The sign. When you used it with Eli, did you think about it, or did it just happen?" He thought for a moment. "It just happened," he said. "Rosa signs at home constantly. It gets into your hands after a while. You stop thinking about it as a different language, and it's just how you talk." She looked at him. She thought about the 45 minutes every Tuesday and Thursday when she had been available to Eli the way a building is available, present and structured and unable to come to the floor. She thought about a man who learned to sign because his daughter needed him to, and then forgot he was doing it because it had simply become how he moved through the world. She thought, Eli's first word was not the beginning of something. It was the evidence of something that was already there, already building, in a room she kept leaving him in. She thought, I've been building the right infrastructure for the wrong person. She thought, that is something I can change. Eli stood up from the pavement and walked to the bench and climbed up beside her without asking and leaned against her arm and looked out at Rosa, who was still drawing with the committed energy of someone with a vision. He signed something small against her sleeve. She looked at his hands. She knew this one. Marcus had taught her in week 2. Friend, he had signed. She put her arm around him. Yes, she said, and she used her hand too. Friend. Across the pavement, Rosa looked up and saw the sign and grinned and signed it back with her whole arm, large and emphatic, the way a 6-year-old signs something she means completely. Daniel saw it. He did not say anything. But beside her on the bench, she felt the small shift of a person who has just seen something land exactly where it was supposed to. She thought, I came to this bench to thank a stranger. She thought, I don't think that's what this is anymore. She did not say it. She did not need to say it. The afternoon held them all for a while longer, 2 children on a pavement drawing something that had no name yet, 2 adults on a bench watching them, the city running its ordinary life around the specific, quiet gravity of a moment that had started with one word spoken by a small boy to a man who had simply been there, hands open, paying attention. Truck, Eli had said, and everything, without announcing itself, had begun. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.